You should see how fancy it is when we do it in person. We have a studio. We've got to do one in person at one point.
I know. I saw you do one in person, and there you were on a couch as Robo Peter.
Joe, I don't like those couch ones. I like a table and two people sat opposite each other, and then I can have like a pen and a pad. Those couch ones,
Joe Rogan style.
Yeah, I just feel awkward on a couch.
Right. Yeah. Was that because you had a sore back, or you shouldn't? Right. You fixed that.
No, I just when I was in New York, I just booked a suite thinking we could use it. And the one I had for Michael Malice, they didn't have the same setup. So the one I had with Michael Malice was a wide suite, and so we could have a table at the end sit opposite each other. But the formation, the way this room was set up, it was a long one, so you couldn't do the same setup. So it was kind of annoying. So we just used a couch, and I didn't like it.
All right. Okay. Fair enough.
Anyway, man, you well?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah.
How's your month been?
It's been like, I don't know. It's like this year's like every day is very similar, but different. Like, things change within the work, which is really interesting. But, you're in a house. We kind of took a staycation, went to a hotel, booked a suite, took the baby along, test run for the traveling ahead, and yeah, that was a change. But yeah, same old. Markets are different.
Hopefully we're going to meet up. Let's talk about markets, man. So I've no idea where we are, where we're going. It doesn't feel like 2013, and it doesn't feel like 2017. I just don't know where we are. Where the hell are we, Willy?
Well, that's what I've been telling everybody. This is unique. This bull run 2020, 2021 wouldn't have seen anything like it before. Structurally, it's completely different, right? So you can template all you like the price pattern from 2013. Oh, we're going to do a double pump, but the underlying investor activity is very, very different. And Bitcoin's maturing. It's getting very much larger players. We have institutions coming along. We've had a lot of speculators that are trading correlations, which we saw this last week as this, for example, this last week, we've had nothing but buying by investors. They're buying on the exchanges, they're scooping it up, moving it off to cold storage, and you can look forensically at the blockchain and go, oh, okay, they're buying. And actually right now, which is really not very common, is that you see the long-term investors. And when I say long-term, I mean, it's not really long-term. You don't know how long they'll hold those coins for, but these are the guys that keep accumulating. They buy, they seldom actually sell any of their coins. And then you've got these guys that are like what I call the swing traders, the medium-term guys that buy and sell. And those guys are buying as well. So everyone's buying right now. Meanwhile, the price is collapsing because you've got this new kind of speculative risk-off trading. People are like leverage trading and they're selling down. That's the only explanation for this price pullback, is that we had the Evergrande. How do you pronounce that? Evergrande? I just read.
I think it's Evergrande.
Evergrande. Okay, Evergrande scare, and also we had the Fed tapering kind of notice, and you can see the S&P 500 starting to test support. And we went into this last weekend like that, and on the weekend trading, it started to look very weak, and it sold off, and Bitcoin likewise started selling off. So it was just selling off on a correlation to the S&P 500, where nothing but spot buying. And so, that's one of the things that's interesting in this year, is that we've got different actors in the market, and they're all doing different things. And obviously, I look on chain, so I look at what medium long-term investors doing. To see what speculators doing, you really have to use derivatives data, and that's not quite as reliable. But yeah, so we've had this kind of mismatch, and like, I mean, I think a few people got very, very bearish, but there's really no cause to be super bearish. I think there's even a few people that are they still think we're in a bear market, but like, again, structurally on chain, what the real investors are doing is, we've never been in a bear market. Arguably, you might have been tipped into a bear market, but more like a little bit of a bear market within a greater macro setup. And so, yeah, that's the interesting thing. This cycle is not a cycle in my reckoning. Like, oh, this cycle is different. I'm like, it's not even a cycle. Like, I don't think we're going to top, and we're going to have another 4-year sort of revolution where we have like a 1-year bear market. It's not looking like that at all.
I think that's healthy, though, Willy.
Yeah, well, it was eventually going to happen, right? Eventually, the halving will not be powerful enough, because, what is it? 1.6% inflation rate is what the miners are adding to the Bitcoin supply. Whether it's right now, whether it's 0.5% inflation rate, or is a 0.1% inflation rate, sooner or later, that's not going to mean anything. It's going to go to zero. At a certain point, it's going to break loose from the halving cycle, and there's going to be other effects that impact it. And I think it's already happened. And even right now is like, the interesting thing is the mining has gotten so large and so like corporate that, we're starting to see numerous like mining operations that are publicly traded. And those guys now, many of them aren't selling, because they are really, people investing in them for their Bitcoin. So they're not selling, they sell more equity to get more Bitcoin through their mining operations. So that sort of sell down's gone from some of the large operators. So yeah, I think we're broken loose already. So it's like breaking, I'm not, there's a lot of people thinking, oh, wow, as the thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the cycles will lengthen. I'm not saying that either. I think that it's binary. We had this 4-year lock-in from the halving, and then once we break free, then we're in correlations to macro, and macro cycle at around roughly 10 years. And I think because of that, this won't be a cycle. We're correlated to macro more than Bitcoin's internal halving. So yeah, it's not like other cycles, because A, we're not in a cycle, and B, underneath the structure of what the investors are doing is completely different than what we've ever seen before.
Well, I think breaking the cycle is actually bullish for Bitcoin. I would exchange a smaller top this year for not having a large drawdown that starts next year. I don't like the structure of a 4-year cycle. Look, if I knew it, understood it, could trade it, yeah, obviously it's great for gains. But if we want the market to mature, and we want Bitcoin to be an asset that more people come in and use and don't fear the volatility, I would much rather have a more stable price than these 4-year cycles. So I think it's actually bullish for Bitcoin. And also, if the cycle is broken, there isn't going to be that big incentive for a massive sell-off come January, well, unless people have got to pay their taxes.
Yeah, I don't know. Because we've got other impacts, right? Like fourth quarter, well, that's well into the zone where we're all expecting ETFs to start coming in America, and fourth quarter is where we expect much more institutional in terms of corporate treasuries coming in. So these kind of demand and supply things meet, and maybe the buying is going to overwhelm it. Certainly is setting up that way structurally on chain. But I agree, like, it's good to not have those 80% pullbacks over a year, because it wreaks havoc on all of Bitcoin's metrics: volatility, Sharpe ratio, risk. the risk undertaken and all that sort of stuff. It all just means that you can allocate more if the risk is less. So yeah, no, it's that's the great thing about this industry is it keeps changing, and everything we've learned in the past does not necessarily apply into the future. Particularly these kind of fractals that of cycles. I think it's not going to work. This shorter time frames maybe, but not the larger ones, because I think we're in a different era. Like all the metrics are broken as well. Like on chain, all those metrics that I used to use a year or even 1 to 2 years ago, I don't even look at them now. I think they're just so archaic. They're like Stone Age tools compared to the stuff we need to look at today. That's advancing as well. So yeah, it's a whole new ball game right now with these markets.
Has it made trading harder for you?
No, I think it's become better. Well, it's hard because I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. I'm learning as well. So I really feel like I wasn't consistently profitable until the last maybe 18 months, maybe even 12 months. And on-chain analysis has been a big part of that. And I mean, my size of trade is probably, I don't know, it's probably about 50 times bigger than it used to be a year ago. So like, that gives you an idea of the confidence I have now than I used to. And yeah, like, so I think I'm getting better. It's getting better. Like I'm getting better. It's harder to I think it is harder to trade these markets, but an interesting thing that I've like, I'm coming around to Bitcoin is not, if you're going to trade Bitcoin really properly, you don't want to be trading just Bitcoin. You really want to take a look at the greater crypto ecosystem and trading all of it. You might hate this.
No, well, do you know what? It's funny. I've got it in my notes here because I've been trying to be as objective as I possibly can about the broader crypto market for a couple of reasons. I don't want to just be a maxi because every other Bitcoiner I know is a maxi, and therefore I feel pressured to be one. And I also want to recognize like the wider role I'm doing with the podcast. Now, listen, I'm not going to start covering altcoins. It's not a thing. I've made an Ethereum show with Lane Rettig because he quit the Ethereum Foundation. And I think that's a super interesting conversation about governance. And you can compare what I think is, and what he says is the failures in Ethereum governance to what has been successful governance in Bitcoin. Some people say there's no Bitcoin governance, but there clearly is.
There totally is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
I'm not going to suddenly make what Ethereum did, whilst I could probably double my annual revenue. I'm not going to do what Solana did, and I'm not going to cover those projects. But what I am going to do is try and get a broader understanding of where the crypto market is going, what it means for Bitcoin. And another reason I'm doing this as well is that I'm not sure how effective arguing with people over crypto versus Bitcoin is. And I'm not sure if actually it's a net negative. One, for me personally in terms of my podcast. Two, wider for Bitcoin. So we're jumping way ahead of something I wanted to discuss in this. So there is this kind of overlying threat as a Bitcoiner that if you consider any other crypto, that you can have your reputation destroyed and cancelled. We saw that when Breedlove took a look at, what was it called? BitClout, yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. It was
that's the Twitter social networky thing. Yeah, BitClout, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've got no interest in BitClout, but I've been at I was at 3 conferences in the last week in New York, and they were crypto conferences, and I went there to talk about Bitcoin. But I kind of want to understand the wider crypto thing. I'm halfway through Alan Farrington's document. I'm following Udi's tweeting at the moment with interest, and I'm happy to discuss it. But I'm perfectly aware that there is like this overlying threat that if you go a little bit too into crypto, that you risk being cancelled. Now, listen, I don't give a fuck. If people want to cancel me, they can. But I'm trying to understand people. I'm trying to understand motivations. I'm just trying to understand where technology is going. Now, listen, my conclusion is quite simple. In that, I'm basically agreeing with both Udi and Alan. I don't think these things are all scams. Yes, there are scams. I don't think these things are scams. I think some of them are. I basically my comparison is Bitcoin is my vault, crypto is Vegas. I keep my money in my vault. Some people go to Vegas, and I'm watching these people in Vegas have loads of fun. My explanation on Twitter the other day is I feel like I'm in a conference room in Las Vegas discussing human rights and financial freedom, watching people on the roulette wheel through the window. That's how I feel like it's going on.
Yeah, I'm looking at it very similar, but not similar. I don't call it a casino because the casino is, you can't beat the house. Whereas I think of it more like venture investment, like Bitcoin is money. So I'm a maximalist on Bitcoin as money. I think it's one. And people often think I'm a maximalist, but I'm not. I think that there will be a lot of interesting technology that's going to come out of the space. And this is one of the problems if you're in Bitcoin, if you start talking about stuff that's outside of Bitcoin, you're considered promoting scams, which I don't think is the case in 2021. 2017, a lot of it was scams, and there's a lot of Ponzi's and still is now, but there's some really interesting technologies out there, and the due diligence is fully available if you want to be the VC type. So let's face it, Bitcoin is not going to do a 10,000x from here. Other than Bitcoin, fiat going to infinity in terms of money printing, it's not, in terms of real returns of things you can buy, maybe in a gold-based return, it's not going to do another 10,000x. We might get 100x, maybe 1,000x, but over the next, until saturation. And then, so if this is your money, then it's like, some of these technologies are going to be pretty interesting, and so I do think there's value if you want to invest in some of this stuff, but you really have to be like an angel investor in a seed level startup, which I've done because I've done startups in the past. Oh man, it's a 98% failure rate, right? And you would call that a scam. Like you would go, oh, you raised money, you told a pitch, and then you try to build something, and then you kept raising money and try to build something, and you haven't got any customers yet, but no one does. You're just trying to get critical mass, and eventually you run out of money and it collapses. And then, like, as a seed investor, you don't call that person a scammer. You just say that was a failed high risk investment because only 2% of the 100% get through to being, a liquidity event. And these are very similar. They're very untested technologies. No one's figured out this stuff before, and you will totally lose money on this if you make the wrong bets. The only difference is that you've got a live traded price, which is open to manipulation. I think that bit is debatable. I mean, I don't even think it's debatable. I think it's really open to a lot of scamming. But behind all of this, some of the really good projects, and actually, luckily, like the top 20, many of them actually are doing some interesting things, right? And so it's not like if you looked at 2017, the top 10, top 20 were like full of crappy projects. So I think, I wasn't going to go down this path, but there is that analogy to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is money, and then you can try your hand in venture investing into this stuff that retail can now do, because you can't do this on equities because the SEC have like shut all that down since the .com crash. Sarbanes-Oxley has like made the requirements for a growing venture to be too high. So you get the likes of Uber becoming like 100 billion or whatever valuation before even it looks at getting listed. And no one wants to like invest in something that's had the first 10,000x taken by the VCs and the rich guys. And so here we've got this realm where retail can do their own research, which some of them are very sophisticated. So there's that part of it that I think is valid. The other part I was really going to talk about, just the markets itself, is if you were to trade it.
We'll come back to that, the markets itself, because I think the actually discussing what this stuff is super important. And I'm trying to evolve my idea or my ideas around it in a way which explains like exactly where I are with people, because I want to avoid, like, I'm happy to talk about this stuff. I'm never be stopped talking about what I want to talk about, but I want to avoid people saying the accusation will come that Pete's now a shitcoiner, who's going to turn the show into a shitcoin show. That's not going to happen. I am entirely focused on Bitcoin because I'm entirely focused on Bitcoin as money, and I consider crypto fintech. I think crypto outside of Bitcoin has largely failed to be decentralized enough, but I do think it's succeeded on the permissionless layer. I do, though, long-term think most of these protocols are screwed, whereas Bitcoin is here for perhaps a century or centuries. I struggle to think something better.
And that's totally valid, right? I think Bitcoin has won on the monetary war. And all these other ones are screwed, which is what you expect. 98% failure in the traditional startup round. You expect the majority of these things will fail. It doesn't mean they're scams. And hell, let's allow retail to invest in this stuff, because you can also get the upside of that, right? I'm really in favor of not a nanny state. I'm in favor of people being fully exposed to the volatility, which we haven't had in, God knows, maybe 100 years since central bank type policies have come in and controlled the stability. So we've had really stable money where people are happy to earn, what used to be 2% and be rock solid, whereas the real world is volatile. It's volatile, ridiculously volatile. And we've got multiple generations that are oblivious to it, and they're so scared of taking risks, which does not push humanity forward. And this is why probably a lot of people depressed at home, because they don't get to live. Like we were evolved into a life that was full of risk, and we're totally alive. And now we're dumbed down with all the risk taking off the table, and with a nanny state. And I think it's totally good. Even on that alone, I think it's totally good that people can invest in these volatile, very crazy ups and totally lose all of your money on it if you do it badly. Kind of instruments. I think that we're in an internet age, and all information is out there for people to study. And it's not like it's predatory. You do have scamming.
I'm not sure. I tell you what, I'm reticent to compare investing in crypto protocols to investing in companies for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you have no legal claim to a company with these tokens. You just have the token itself, sometimes which have little value beyond being something to pay for gas within the protocol. Whereas if you are investing in a company, if you own shares, you have a legal claim to part of that company. You also have, hopefully at some point, access to dividends and such with it. Whereas I think ultimately all these crypto projects fail, and my probably major concern is that what happens during this period, what I've noticed with the newer protocols, what's coming on, is that the hedge funds are largely the ones getting in very early and buying up a substantial amount of the tokens. And what happens when it goes to market, it becomes available to everyone else, but the little guy can still get absolutely crushed in these markets. So I'm reticent to compare the two, but I also at the same time support open and free markets. I'm not going to be buying them myself. So I'm reticent to compare the two. I
think there are real problems with that haven't been fixed, but they can be fixed. I'll get into that later. I think that when I'm not talking about like ownership and like the next, the next Heinz factory. The Heinz factory. I'm talking about the next thing, right? You have a legal claim onto a startup venture. Actually, you don't even have a legal claim. Let's face it, if you're going to invest in startups, you don't have a legal claim. What you have is a safe note, which used to be a convertible debt instrument, but now it's like this agreement for future equity. You have no legal claim whatsoever. Like, that's standard. If you're at the seed level startup, you have no legal claim. And even if it goes bust, and if you had a legal claim, what are you going to do? Sue them for having a shot at it? So it's not much different. The only difference with that's really screwed up in crypto is that you can totally exit scam because you get your money before you've delivered anything. Right?
Well, yeah, I can go back to a very old interview I did with Jill Carlson. She said the problem with these crypto protocols is you're doing your seed round and your IPO at the same time, and you haven't found product market fit, and you haven't delivered something which is potentially scalable and will last for years. Now, listen, there are different categories within that. You have the outright scams within there, and you have the ones that will appear for few months and then disappear, and then you have something like Ethereum or Solana, or I think was it Avex now, I can't remember, but they appear that like they might have some more longevity. But what I think will happen is, you know, where Ethereum made a trade-off with centralization and security versus Bitcoin, I think Solana's made a bigger trade-off. And I think what will happen is, you know, at some point, other ones will make a bigger and bigger trade-off. And I really feel like there's a massive incentive for hedge funds like Multicoin Capital to support these protocols, get in early, invest their 20 million, which, if it's successful, then turns into hundreds of millions, if not billions. But the problem is with these people, to realize their gains, they have to get liquidity to exit, and their liquidity is going to come from maybe some other hedge funds coming in later, or you know, other
or retail.
But they're going to need a lot of support from retail at some point or another. And reading in depth the Alan Farrington report, ultimately these systems are kind of screwed because they are kind of Ponzi in design. But what was really interesting, bear with me on this because I've got Alan's document open for me, and what I like that he's done, he's been very fair. I'm going to quote him. He's very fair about what's, for example, Ethereum is. So he says the permissionless nature of Ethereum-based applications collapses barrier to entry for entrepreneurs down to zero. End consumers are the primary beneficiaries of this innovative environment because all applications share the same database, the Ethereum blockchain. Moving capital between platforms is trivial. This forces projects to ruthlessly compete on fees and user experience. Now, I think that's rather than just when people are out there just saying, "Oh, Ethereum's a scam," I just think it's a very it's kind of a silly argument because it doesn't explain what the scam is. You know, people here have built and actually quite an interesting technology. Now, the idea that I can own an asset and I have a wallet and you have a wallet and we don't have to create an account on every single different website and we can transfer assets between us is super cool. I think that's super interesting. He even said this. He says, "This is an admirable achievement. It is easy to see why the combination of features enormously benefits consumers." Referring back to our initial characterization of the concept of decentralized finance in the introduction, no individual or entity can maliciously or politically affect market activity, be this in the form of agitating to advantage themselves or disadvantage others. So that to me was like a very super interesting look at Ethereum as the technology, not whether it's delivered, not whether it has future scaling issues, what it's trying to achieve. And I struggle to call that a scam because they are trying to deliver something that doesn't exist within the market. And that's interesting.
You know, I think it's Ethereum gets called a scam because of reflex. Just because of reflex, because Maximus call any pre-sale a scam because we saw so many scams with pre-sales. Ethereum had a pre-sale. You know, what was it, $15 million pre-sale? And so it was instantly labeled as a scam by Bitcoiners. Never mind that Vitalik never exited. And never abandoned the project and kept pushing it on, right? And no one lost any money. And so effectively, it was exactly like a startup venture where they took money, they delivered some technology and it got traction and everybody won. But we don't call these startups like Airbnb or Uber or Facebook or Google or whatever, we don't call them scams because everybody Well, people who took the risk knew what they're up for.
It depends on the startup. We would call a Theranos a scam.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and because but that ultimately it was whether or not the founder pushed it, the team and the founder pushed it forward and delivered something. And I was going to get to this thing. Is like Ethereum itself. We've got our first smart contracts platform. People could do a ICO and solve the exit scam problem by saying we will have we won't get our pre-mined tokens until we get these milestones, and you could encode that. You could encode that within these smart contracts networks. Can't be your one because your one isn't live yet, but it's solvable. And I think that if we moved voluntarily into this, we'd build a lot more trust in from the community, and that might even accelerate their success. So I think we can move into a space where the stuff can be, the scamminess of it the potential for scamminess of it can be mitigated. But yeah, I see now more and more some very legitimate projects and good innovation coming in that, to be honest, many diehard maximalists who are blind eye to, they just think it's a scam.
Well, what I think the best way to approach it, Willie, is that I think ultimately Bitcoin is money, and we think Bitcoin is the best form of money and it supports freedom. I think you and I fundamentally agree on that. Maximalists agree on that. Even a number of people who are saying Ethereum would agree on that. I mean, Lane, who I was with the other day, he's an Ethereum guy, but he agrees with that. What I've noticed is that shouting at somebody about Ethereum does not change their opinion on Ethereum, but educating them maybe on why Bitcoin is different and what it offers them, it might, like Dan Hale said the other day, look, you've made a load of money on Dogecoin, maybe you can put a little bit of that in Bitcoin. So what I would rather do from the approach now on is, rather than just be like toxic and yelling at people about why Bitcoin is better, despite the fact I did a little triggering email to tweet storm yesterday, is actually I'm probably just going to talk about what potential problems exist with Ethereum and say to people, look, you might make some money, but you definitely want to consider holding some in Bitcoin. And this is why Alan's approach is really good. He recognizes what the achievement is with Ethereum, but then he critiques what its problem is. So I've got this here, like the underlying backend infrastructure for DeFi Ethereum must continue to scale in order to support higher bandwidth demands, processing approximately 1.5 million unique transactions per day. Ethereum is already at its current max capacity, and transaction fees have spiked as a result. But notice, transactions fees spiking is good for security. So we have somewhat a perverse situation in which the more secure the protocol becomes, the more its value proposition suffers. In order to become more usable, it has to become less secure. So it's kind of interesting that you can. I think it's more interesting to critique it like you would critique Bitcoin and say, look, if you're going to invest, this is the risk and this is where to put the money. But I just think yelling at each other is not got us anywhere. And actually, I think it's just kind of PTSD from 2017 where people think they need to yell at somebody because of what happened with the fork wars. But I think we just have to mature beyond that. We've got hedge funds and crypto investors and Wall Street guys and retail. There's lots of people looking at the crypto space, and I think it's a potentially losing a war on narrative to shout about the wrong things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really think I think Bitcoiners are like, unlike maybe Michael Saylor thinks this is like the Hornets that defend it. I actually think they're doing Bitcoin a disservice. Sometimes I look at crypto Twitter and I look at the Bitcoin conversations, and it's almost like boomers yelling at the cloud type thing, like there's nothing new. It's like Bitcoin fixes this, all these memes, laser eyes, like have fun staying poor, like it's just meme after meme after meme, but not a lot of, if you remember like back in the day, only like 5 years ago, there was really smart conversation going on about the tech. That's all gone now. It's all just memes. And the interesting conversations tend to be in these newer protocols because they're trying new stuff, and they're not I don't know if it's arrogance, but I don't know why Bitcoiners need to be so insecure. It's already won the monetary network. And in a way, I think it's beneficial people stack Bitcoin and then they then move into these other investments and then bring it back, right? You get velocity, you get Bitcoin being used as a, like, we actually in 2017, even as much as it was a bubble, that's what we used to do. We'd like stack it into Bitcoin and then we might buy some might have been a scam, might have been interesting, or might have been totally, you lose your shirt on it. But if you made some money, you bring it back into Bitcoin. And we had a lot of, and Bitcoin was being used. Like, that's your store of value, that's your safe spot, that's your money. And then you go to, and I think it's much more healthy to have that than everyone saying, don't invest in all this other stuff, which is actually new innovations. Let's just hoard it into Bitcoin and not do this stuff so that we don't actually have the decentralized web. You don't actually have all this innovation. Like, how are we going to digitize traditional finance and then go beyond that? If we just hoard our Bitcoin and hodl it, and then shit on any project that wants to try something new. Like, what that ends up is that you get a whole bunch on one side, which are Bitcoin hodlers, and the other side you have traditional finance, providing all the services the world needs, insurance products, options, you just name, like, all the stuff that we need, mortgages, whatever you can think of. Who's got a mortgage here? Who's taking a line of credit out? We'd be in this world where we have Bitcoin on one side and traditional financially providing all the services that people need. I would much rather have Bitcoin as the monetary base and a really nice bunch of crypto networks that are providing these services, and they don't necessarily need to be the ultimate in decentralization like Bitcoin. They can be decentralized enough, to give people access.
What I would say is I would be careful too, because I've come up against this before as a mistake to group all Bitcoiners together. I think there's like a spectrum, right? We've got the super hardcore maxis, and then we've got people a little bit more kind of like happy to discuss projects. Some people want to invest in multiple ones. There's certainly a group who are absolutely firm in their defense, what they believe is their defense of the protocol, especially because of what happened in 2017. And I think if you're someone like President Bukele, who's literally put your 95% approval rate on the line to become a Bitcoin-based country, I think it's healthy to know there's a group of people like that who are going to defend any kind of potential attacks on the protocol. And I think that's really super interesting. And then within there's a bunch of people who just recognize that some of these protocols really are most likely to fail, and that's fine. But I just think it's a losing war fighting that all the time. But like I say, we have a range of people doing different things, so kind of doesn't really matter. I did an interview with this guy. Do you know Greg Carlson from XBTO?
No.
I did an interview with him the other day, and I felt like his thesis was kind of really interesting. He said to me, Bitcoin is sound money, and it's moves slow. It's a glacier. He said it has to, because everything it builds has to be right and has to work and has to be it has to do one job, which is be the best money in the world. Therefore, maximally decentralized and work. He said NFTs, security tokens, ICOs, all those smart contract platforms really are a test bed for what works. Because it's in a move fast, break things environment. Once you find out what there's market demand for, that ultimately could get built on a Bitcoin layer, because you would want to have that on a sound money layer. And he was similar to you. He said the shit coins, they're venture capital for Gen X. Is it Gen X or Zoomers? He said it's venture capital for those people who can't get in to venture investing elsewhere and can go out and have a bit of fun. Yeah. And I kind of felt like that was a pretty interesting thesis, and something I'm happy to discuss. I'm still going to be all in Bitcoin,
I think it's valid. I don't think it'll all be built on Bitcoin. I don't think it's feasibly possible. And knowing how technology has evolved online and within computers, there's not ever going to be one. Like, People keep thinking Ethereum's a competitor, but Bitcoin's very simple. It's a protocol. Protocols are like, you define protocols as things that message, and the message we're sending is I'm sending you money. Whereas Ethereum's not a protocol; it's a platform. A platform gives you a whole development environment and a language to create things with. And so once you're a platform, things come into fashion, out of fashion. They're not like internet. The internet is based on TCP/IP, right? That's a protocol. All you do is you send bits of data to each other. You do handshakes. That's like Bitcoin. Ethereum's a platform. And, if anyone's been in computers long enough, you'll notice that, like, you could look at any website on the web and it's a website, right? That's sent to you through a protocol, but the platform it's built on, it changes all the time, like it can be built on Python, it can be built on, JavaScript, PHP, whatever. Like Facebook was built on PHP and then they moved to their own version. Now anything at scale uses probably 5 or 10 different platforms to build their individual bits. And I think that's what's going to happen with these crypto platforms, is that we'll use a whole bunch of them and they'll come into and out of fashion. You'll see, like Tether jumped from Omni layer to Ethereum ERC20s, and then they're on Tron, I think, and Solana. So you'll see some of these applications start to spread across different networks. And so, yeah, that's completely different things. And I don't think that Bitcoin should be worried about it. And Ethereum should be like in a knife fight with other, like maybe not even that. It's just like, it's got to find its niche of why people are going to choose that versus Solana or the next thing or the next thing. Because each one of them will do a job, if they're done right, designed to do a job very, very well in a particular niche, and they'll grab that because that's a particular need. And then things will change and there'll be another need and another platform come along. And I think that is what we'll see, because we've seen it before.
Well, that was my debate with Knut Svenholm when I discussed with him. He was like, he said Ethereum has no utility. And I was like, well, the people using it are finding utility. So it has utility. It's just disagree with it.
I mean, I use Bitcoin as a store of value, sure. So it's stuck in a cold storage, right? I use Ethereum as part of my private banking, because private banking is so shitty, right? Because sending US dollars anywhere is crap. It gets blocked. I think I'm going to end with these rants, so I'm not going to talk about why they get blocked. They always get blocked. So eventually I just go,
but everyone loved your rant last month.
Every dollar I get, I move it onto the exchange and I convert it to USDC. So now I can move that stuff, whether I'm going to invest in something or whether I want to get yield from it. This is all running on Ethereum, right? Like the finance, I'm using private banking in part powered by Ethereum because USDC is on it. Maybe it'll run on a Solana if I was to use their version of it. So, it is day to day, I use it a lot. Bitcoin's nice. It's a great store of value and great. It's also great. It's putting up the fight in the geopolitical sense of, and that's really important. And it's, maybe it's like, I think Jack Mollers would say that that's much more important than me getting my banking done. Because I can get my stuff done, whereas there's a whole part of the world that is completely screwed. So that Bitcoin sort of fight is very important for, geopolitically, future of the world sort of thing.
Well, I noticed you've been tweeting a bit more about those kind of issues, and maybe you have all the time, and I've not really noticed it, but I noticed recently you've been part of the fight, part of the argument for Bitcoin, part of the argument for freedom. I think it's a really interesting time for that as well. Like I put out this tweet that I'm so embarrassed about at the start of the lockdown. But when the lockdowns first happened and we were seeing like bodies in China falling on the floor and dying, and major issues in Wuhan and Italy, I was like, look, I support these lockdowns. I support I can't remember exactly what I said. Like, I think I said I support draconian laws to protect us. Honestly, I'm so embarrassed about it now. I think I've become more orange pilled in the last 6 months than any time previously in Bitcoin, but I'm almost too embarrassed to admit it because it's like, oh yeah, you're flip flopping. Like following everything that's happened in Melbourne in Australia now, I think is a real lens to how scary a Western supposedly civilized democracy can get. Have you been following what's happening in Melbourne?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, it's real clear to me that, funny thing is, like, every time we get to the end of an epoch of an era of money, it happens every 100 years, there's something like 70% chance of a war happening, like a world war. And I'm getting to think the world war that's going to happen is not like others. It's pretty much the people against their governments. I think it's like a revolution war. Yeah, and it kind of makes sense because the world's very well traveled now. We've been to different places and we like people from the other walks of life. It's really the disconnect. You only go to war to this kind of alien culture that you don't like understand or don't like at all, and that's like the common people and the elites. Like right now, it's like it seems like that's going to be the war that's going to happen. And so, yeah, and this is front and center. Our own money is front and center in something like this.
Well, it's really, Marx would have called them was it the proletariat in Melbourne? I think it was a real attack on working class to mandate vaccine for construction workers. And listen, look, I've said it before, I'm vaccinated. I think the stats clearly show that in most scenarios that vaccines they make sense. But I absolutely support the idea this should be optional because people have taken the vaccine and died, or people have taken the vaccine and they've had heart issues. Now, you can't force something on somebody that has a risk of killing them. I just don't believe
it's not even that, right? You can't force someone to take something into their own sovereign body.
Yeah.
Because if you can, then what's to say that, like, maybe let's assume that the government is out for our best interests. They haven't shown that of late for the last few decades. But let's assume that's the case since they're out for our own benefit. And then we take this vaccine and we say, okay, you now have jurisdiction on what I put into my body. That's just a 1984 scenario, right? No, what's the next thing they're going to stick in your body? Yeah, totally. So I think this is about pro-freedom. And yeah, I think that there's this growing anger, and that's kind of very dangerous.
Well, if you look at this thing in Melbourne now, so it's the slippery slope is really interesting because I've been following it daily. So a couple of days ago, aerial footage is now banned. The helicopters have to get approval to go up and take aerial footage. So they don't want aerial footage of the protests because they don't want to show the size of the protests. Some of the violence, if you just go onto Twitter and you search for Melbourne and go into videos, some of the violence that's being dished out by the police, riot police, whoever they are. There was one shot of a guy in a train station whose face slammed into the floor. They're shooting people with rubber bullets, which I think is a very dangerous step. Now, today, there's an internet blackout in Melbourne. There's an actual internet blackout because they don't want people sharing the material.
You're describing China, really. It's like Australia's turning to China, right? We're going to ban this because that footage will leak. The Great Wall of Australia.
The irony that Australia is kind of in a semi-cold war with China at the moment anyway is an interesting lens to see Australia become the same. But then you compare it to the US and you say, well, look what's happening in New York. I've just been there and I had to, in almost every scenario, show my ID and my proof of vaccine to get into any restaurant or bar. Now, luckily, US has the federal system, so you can choose to opt out of that and go and live in, I don't know, Texas or Florida or Wyoming, the free states. In the UK, we don't have that. And I feel like if you had a spectrum of this kind of new wave of authoritarianism, the UK isn't hugely behind Australia. Yet we're not there yet, but you can see this slippery slope. So
the only thing that saves us is decentralization. The reason why you can move to a different state in the federal system in the US is because it's decentralized. Ultimately, this is the only thing that beats totalitarianism is decentralization.
But even in the US, you say that. Even in the US, what's kind of interesting at the moment is that Biden has mandated all companies with more than 100 employees, everyone has to be vaccinated. And I don't know what's the status of that is. And I was listening to, I've mentioned this on the show before. I was listening to Jack Murphy on a podcast with Tim Pool talking about something like, I hope I've got this correct. There's a $14,000 fine if you don't, if one of your employees is not vaccinated and comes to work, and they can just go straight into your bank account and take that money. So your AR-15s don't. That's what they're talking about. Your AR-15s can't stop that happening. They just steal your private property. So they're coercing the owners of companies into who they can and can't employ, which is squeezing people. I don't know, what they can do on a state level to.
I don't even think the federal government has that jurisdiction.
I thought it didn't.
It's like over the last 2 decades, the federal government's been doing a power grab and disassembling a lot of the structure that was put in place in the US. I think ultimately, it's almost a cliche. Democracy is only there on the strength of the citizen that defends it, and even that, it's getting weaker and weaker. It's nothing like the 60s where people really went out on the streets and totally pushed, say the US against war and whatnot, So,
well, the problem is, really, is so many people actually support a lot of the government decisions. So you can easily follow it by just go on Twitter. There's a lot of people in New York who absolutely support the idea of vaccine passports. And one guy I replied to on Twitter the other day who talked about the system doesn't work currently as a passport because you show the card, which you can lose, or you have different versions from different locations. You really need some kind of like coordinated app, which I made a joke about. But it's really interesting. Not just because of Bitcoin, but just because of watching what's happened. I think the last 6 months I've been more orange pilled than ever, and started to realize I am pro vaccine choice, and I'm vaccinating myself, but I feel like I really need to stand up and support those who don't want to be vaccinated. Their free choice. I absolutely have to support that.
Yep, I agree. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, I see everyone's very, they're pro the government there. And what's interesting to me is that there's a government where it's led by Jacinda Ardern, who's shown an immense amount of empathy for people, and she never goes on air to tell people what to do. She always says, good on you, like mama, good on you, encourages you, goes, and we have to dig in. I'm really asking you to stay at home. And, it's like you do that and then you see what happens is you have huge amounts of support and trust, and people can work together as a country. New Zealand's eliminated the virus on 2 occasions now. I think right now there's another spread of the new Delta variant, but everyone's locking down and they're doing their bit, and they're doing it almost like a war, World War II kind of spirit of digging in, because there's a government that they trust because it's shown empathy and it's asked and never told. And on the other side of the ditch in Australia, you've got the exact opposite. Yeah, we call it the other side of the ditch. You got the exact opposite. Rubber bullets, banning this, banning drones, banning the internet for all we know. So, yeah, it's a real eye-opener. It's like, how stupid can you get to, we're adults, right? We kind of figured that kind of behavior doesn't work. Yet we see this at a political level.
Well, yeah, the problem is that they've managed to split the people. I would say majority of people would get vaccinated. I think it's not a 50-50. Maybe it's a 60-40, 70-30. And they've managed to convince enough of the maybe 70 who would or are vaccinated that the unvaccinated are the enemy. I've even changed my language because I don't like to use anti-vax in terms of the COVID vaccine anymore. I think anti-vax is a term that has relevance to certain vaccines. I think if you don't take the polio, if you want to take a polio vaccine for your child, that would be moronic. And I also think the MMR is something that's sensible for people to have for their children. I think it statistically makes sense. And I think if you're against those, then perhaps you could be considered an anti-vaxxer. But I actually think the term anti-vax is actually insulting now, because really what it is either vaccine hesitant, or just optionally opting out of a specific vaccine. But we do.
It's polarizing, right? The term's polarizing, and that's the problem with the world right now. Is it's very polarized. The world needs something else, right? That's like the other direction, where we're not polarized and we think freely. We're not in one camp or the other. Like crypto, maximalist versus shitcoiner. That doesn't really help, The world's never black and white, and so, and all that. You can have two people that get along until they talk about politics, and they'll be at each other's throats because it's so polarizing. And then
the polarizing people is effective.
Yeah, it is. So I think that's what we need to do right now as a massive population, is to be less polarized. And if anything, that's what the media portrays. So anyway, that's that. How's that for this month's on-chain analysis?
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, Willy, it's like, this is why the trying to unite people around Bitcoin is actually an important thing, because one thing that I've noticed is quite consistent with Bitcoin is a lot of them aren't political. They're not left or right. Maybe some are, obviously they aren't, but you start to realize, you give that lens over government and you realize they're not really working for you, they're working for themselves. And so perhaps that's why Bitcoin is so important. It is that weapon. It is that one. I think it's very tough to argue Ethereum can do the same as Bitcoin in terms of decentralization and usurping the state. But please go and create your permissionless tools. But I think Bitcoin does offer that just one bit of hope, that actually we have this effective tool there where we can route around the state. And I think that's a really important message, that I think whether you're a Bitcoiner, whether you're a shitcoiner, whether you're a no-coiner, that you should care about, because ultimately, whether you think you need it or not now, you might need it in the future.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that's exactly the framing I think about, is that it's the only game in town for a hard money, which is really the only game in town behind a hard money is decentralization. And everything else is a permissionless network, which is useful. It will enable everyday lives. But right now, the thing that's really important geopolitically is a hard money that is owned by the people.
Well, that makes El Salvador super interesting to see how that actually works for a state that has it as a legal currency, because that might be a good test bed.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about the statement I made about, it's like everything that Bitcoin touches, it decentralizes, and I've seen so many ways that that's played out. Bitcoin was banned in China. And, because Bitcoin touched China, and China didn't like this thing that they couldn't control, so they banned it. So then Bitcoin became more decentralized. And then now the fight right now is, the regulatory war that's happening, that they want to shut Bitcoin in and a lot of the permissionless networks down. And, if they succeed in America in putting through these regulations that mute Bitcoin and altcoins, then what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of the entrepreneurial class that will move their companies out of the US and into these tiny little jurisdictions who are going to give it a shot. El Salvador is like one end of the spectrum. You've got Singapore, you've got Malta, you've got Switzerland, Zug, in there. So there's a lot of countries that are open to saying, you entrepreneurs, come here. And so on the one hand, you've got like the EU shutting this down with the central bank. You've got the US like fighting with regulations. You've got China banning it. The three major powers like saying, shoo, go away, the future, and it's going to flock to all these emerging states. And it's so essentially tipping the power from these central superpowers into like a whole bunch of distribution of power to these smaller regimes. So like Bitcoin touches that geopolitically. So yeah, it's interesting. It's funny how this works. Like Bitcoin fixes this. These memes come up again.
So when I interviewed Harry Suddock the other day, he said everything is good for Bitcoin.
Yeah, everything's good for Bitcoin, practically. So I have to think about what isn't good for Bitcoin. But everything is so far that I've thought about. Maybe
a meteor hitting the Earth.
100x leverage on futures markets. That's bad for Bitcoin. No, that's definitely bad for Bitcoin. So,
well, this has been the least tradey chat of all of our chats, and probably the one I've enjoyed the most.
The last chat was very untradey, and I had to say, don't listen to this because it's got nothing that my followers follow me for, and people I think listen to it because it was reverse psychology.
It was popular. We had the pep talk as well, which was very popular, and now we're going to have this. I think this is going to be popular, Willie. I think we've talked about some.
Let me know. Things. Let me know. I just think people are more into like overseeing how their bank balances or their Bitcoin balances and what the market's going to do.
There's not much to say.
Which is what you're trying to get away from, right?
Well, yes and no. Yeah. What do you think? Do you think this is my manipulation to keep you on the show but not talk about trading?
Perhaps. I think you're just bored of markets.
Well, no. It's just look, when markets are going up, it's super interesting, and when markets are dropping, interesting. When we go sideways, what can you say? There's not too much you can say.
The market's going up. It's just that the price hasn't figured it out yet.
Yeah, but let's reinforce the reason why you should have some Bitcoin and hold it. And if the market's going sideways, you want to be stacking. Yeah, or if the market's dropping, you want to be stacking. If the market's going up, you want to be stacking. Everything's good for Bitcoin. Always stack.
Correct. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
I loved it anyway, Woody. I think this is awesome. Hopefully soon enough we're going to have a beer in person at some point.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, we have to be I don't know when.
some point.
I kind of think we're not going to have free travel till central bank digital countries and central bank digital currencies are out.
Oh God.
I think that I really think there's some sort of bullshit mandate that's like, they're going to have all these whatever, stop people from spending money. We've got to keep inflation under control. We're in an era where monetary policy and fiscal policy together in cahoots. And I was like, shit, if we unlock the world and traveled, we're going to see a real runaway inflation because people can start spending money, and that velocity is going to just go through the economy. And that's probably why that's the reason why I think that, like, why are we like locked down for so long when the risks aren't actually that high anymore? This doesn't make sense. Man. Control and like control over the economy. Yeah. So anyway.
All right, man. Well, listen, I loved this one, and I think people will love it too. And hopefully, I think by next month, maybe we'll be back into crazy bull times, and we could talk about trading.
Okay, sounds good. It is crazy bull times. It's just people haven't figured it out yet.
Peace out, my man.
Okay, man. Catch you later.